Our notes for page 4 are all about comets, asteroids, and meteors. So you should have this page that looks like this. It may already be on page 4. If not, at the end of the video, be sure you do put it on page 4. The first thing we're going to talk about are comets. So a comet is a small mass, like a small, kind of like a ball of dust and ice that travels in an orbit around the sun. So similar to how planets travel around the sun, right? The comets, they have an orbit that's what we call an elliptical or an elongated elliptical, so kind of like oval. So for parts of it, they're really close to the sun, and then parts of it, they're farther out, away from the sun. And so when it nears the sun, when it gets closer, it heats up. Of course, the temperature increases, and that causes it to kind of almost like melt a little bit, and so it leaves a tail of like ice and gas. And so typically we associate comets with kind of a tail on the end. So if we fill out this little bubble right here, comets are made of dust and ice. Sometimes they are called dirty snowballs. You think it's all out of ice, but there's dirt there as well. Okay, and like I said, when it nears the sun and it heats up, it creates like almost like it's melting, and it creates this little tail. So it leaves a tail of ice and gas. A popular example you might have heard before is a Halley's Comet. If we move over here to asteroids, okay, asteroids are really just like rocks, okay, rocks that revolve around the sun as well. They have their own orbit around the sun. They're too small to be considered a planet, right? It's not in the same category as a planet, but they still have some of the same features as far as like revolving around the sun and things like that. So for asteroids right here, asteroids are large rocky objects that revolve around the sun. There's something known as the Asteroid Belt. There's a lot of asteroids that are between Mars and Jupiter, and so we've named that the Asteroid Belt. That's just where there's a larger quantity of those asteroids all in one place. So most asteroids orbit in a vast ring between Mars and Jupiter, known as the Asteroid Belt. I think it's easy to remember this location because as you learned on the planets chart on pages 2 and 3, the planets are divided into like the inner planets and the outer planets. And the inner planets include Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. And then the outer planets are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So the asteroid belt is kind of what separates what we call the inner planets and the outer planets, or the inner solar system and the outer solar system. All right, if we look at the last 3 down here on the bottom half of the page, you can see that the words are very similar. Okay, we have meteor, meteoroid, and meteorite. And a lot of times I think that people use those interchangeably, although technically they're a little bit different. If we start over here with meteoroid, meteoroids are smaller than asteroids, okay, although they're still like rocky objects. They're like they're like pieces of rock. Again, not quite as big as the asteroid. And they are just traveling in space. Similar to the asteroids, they don't necessarily have the same like orbit. but they are objects that are traveling through space. They can, crash into spaceships. They can crash into Earth. And we'll talk about that down here. So, let's see. Meteoroids are small, rocky, or metallic objects that travel in space. A meteor, which you probably recognize from like a meteor shower, right? If you hear on the news, the meteorologist might say that there's a meteor shower that's going to happen tonight. You can go out and you can see those in the night sky. Meteor is the glowing, visible path of the meteoroid that we see. So a lot of times it looks like shooting stars, right, if you were looking at a meteor shower. So it's really just the tail of light emitted by a meteoroid as it enters Earth's atmosphere. So when it gets into the atmosphere and we can see it, we see this like shiny tail of light, and that's what we call a meteor. Technically it's a meteoroid that we can now see with that visible light tail. Then a meteorite is what we call it if it actually has passed through the atmosphere and it strikes the Earth's surface. So it's usually like a portion of a meteoroid, maybe not as big as a meteoroid. Sometimes they can even be as small as a pebble. Okay, so meteorites are meteors that have survived the passage through the atmosphere. And so just like you see like how there's a picture of Earth behind it, think of it as these are the ones that have actually hit the Earth. I think about it because it ends in an E, like Earth. It's the only one that ends in an E. So these have made it through the atmosphere and have hit the Earth. Again, if you haven't already, be sure that these notes end up on page 4. And again, if you haven't already, your table of contents should now be complete just like this.